IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Friday, and that means it is mailbag time. You guys know the drill. Today is the day where you guys get to decide, for the most part, what the topic is going to be on today's show. And I'm very excited about today's show. It's going to be fun. Solo mailbags are always very interesting, but fortunately, although Trevor is too sick to be on the show today, he is going to be on the behind the scenes, starring some questions. So once the show gets started, normally when I'm doing solo mailbags, once the show gets started, it's pretty much whatever's in there. It's hard for me to be able to go through and find questions while I'm also trying to pull up and answer questions. They're on two different screens. But Trevor will be with us today. So you guys, just because the show started doesn't mean you can't get some more questions in. And we've got some very good ones so far today. I've been able to look through some of them, not all of them, but the ones that we do have, I'm really looking forward to answering. Got my guy, Peter Freibert, has gotten a bunch of questions in today already. John A1's got some in, Ballpeen Shillelagh. And so we're going to have some fun today. I hope you guys are excited about today's show. Hope you guys are excited to talk some Notre Dame football. As you know, we'll talk Notre Dame football. We can talk Notre Dame recruiting. We can talk college football as a whole. You can ask some questions that aren't related to those topics, but it's always preferred that we stick more to Notre Dame football and college football. But, you know, there's some good questions that can kind of get in there from time to time that we'll have some fun talking about. And, of course, you guys can get those in there today as well. Before we get started, do me a favor. If you're in here already, go ahead and hit that like button for me. I would greatly appreciate that. If you've not subscribed to our channel yet, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Put that notification bell on there. And one thing that you can do to help us out and help IB out is we've got some videos that we got up on the CFB Nation channel. You go subscribe to the CFB Nation channel on YouTube as well and watch those. We're getting close to being monetized on there, so it'd be great if you guys could help us out with that. And then also, if you are a podcast, I hear people all the time like, well, why do you listen to this show if you don't like that show? Well, I just want more stuff to listen to. Well, that's why you go to the CFB Nation channel on the podcast app as well, whether Spotify, Apple, whatever, however you listen to podcasts. You can not only subscribe to Irish Breakdown, which of course you should do, you can also subscribe to the CFB Nation channel. Our message board is the number one driver of revenue for Irish Breakdown. That is where you can help us the most. The next one after that is our podcast app. So not YouTube, but our podcast app. So people ask all the time, hey, how can I help Irish Breakdown? One way is to listen to our show on the podcast platform. YouTube also helps a bunch, and that's incredibly helpful as well. So just some things that kind of kick the day off with before we get rocking and rolling. But go ahead and throw those questions in. Hit an MB on there or a mailbag emoji. It makes it a little easier for us to get those questions in, to see those questions, star those questions, and to bring them up. If you have a question that you want to get moved to the front of the line, go ahead and throw a super chat in there, and we will do that and get to that question as quickly as we can. So without further ado, let's get rocking and rolling on today's Notre Dame mailbag. We will start off, since he got in here and got rocking and rolling early, we're going to start off with Peter Freibert. And Peter asks, which quarterback had the most hype going into their freshman year, Ron Paulus or Jimmy Clausen? Yeah, that is a really good question. And there's a lot of talk about how hyped up Ron Paulus was coming into Notre Dame. And he was. He was an exceptional high school recruit. I actually think an underrated college quarterback. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Ron Paulus. The guy that I know, or I shouldn't say know, but have had interactions with in the role he has at Notre Dame. But I was a big Ron Paulus fan in college. I really was. I felt like he got a bit of a bad rap, played on some bad Notre Dame teams, and played in a system that didn't fit his skill set at all. But I always liked Ron Paulus as a quarterback. And there was a ton of hype around him, certainly Bino Cook and his 2 Heisman trophies and all that. But the hype around Jimmy Clausen was such a different level just because of, it's kind of the dawn of it wasn't the dawn of the internet age, but I'd say the internet age was really taken off when he was coming out. You had the rival services, which started in 2002, and a lot of the different, what was the other one? It was Scout.com, and a lot of those other sites were just now really taking off when Jimmy Clausen was coming out. And he's one of the guys that they really hyped up to kind of build their product coming out as part of the 07 class. I mean, you had people calling him the LeBron James of football, and he was on covers, and yeah, I would say he was more hyped because there was so much more exposure to him. I think the diehards knew about Ron Paulus and people that really followed it on a day-to-day basis. But even if you were just kind of a person who just was a Notre Dame fan in season, you knew about Jimmy Clausen. And so that's my opinion. I'm curious to kind of hear what some of y'all think that are my age and older, because the other thing that's tough for me to evaluate that, which makes it a little bit more challenging, that's why I'd like to hear from some folks, maybe even some that are a little bit older than me, is the issue that I have with this evaluation is when Ron Paulus was coming up, I was only 14, 15 years old. So maybe to me, he was as hyped as Jimmy Clausen, but it wasn't talked about as much because, maybe, or in my view, because maybe I wasn't as tuned into it maybe I would have been if I was a little bit older or weren't going some things. I was during a period of time where my family was moving from Ohio to Virginia. So there was a lot of different things going on. So maybe he was. I'm just can give you my perspective. I'd be curious from some of you folks that are, maybe my age, maybe a little bit older, what you guys think as far as who do you think was hyped up more, Jimmy Clausen or Ron Paulus? They were both incredibly hyped. I've heard people call Ron Paulus a bust, Jimmy Clausen a bust. I don't think either one of those guys were busts. I think that Ron Paulus' situation was the injury that he had when he got to Notre Dame. I don't know that he ever fully recovered from that. And I guess you could say he didn't play to the expectations, but I don't think that was always his fault. I think the injuries played a big role in it. The system played a big role in it. I remember being told at times that Lou Holtz had promised that they would kind of alter the system for him. I don't know that ever happened. And so I think that has a big factor in the conversation as well. So, yeah, I'd say Jimmy Clausen was the more hyped player between him and Ron Paulus, but they were both incredibly hyped players. I would say that's probably the two. Probably the two most hyped up players. I'd say Manti was in that conversation as well. There were some other guys. Corey Minor got a ton of hype coming out of high school. I thought he was a pretty good player at Notre Dame. So there's been a lot of guys, but I think Clausen was that. And I disagree with the notion that Clausen hyped himself up. I think that was more his family, more so than Jimmy himself. I think Jimmy is one of the more misunderstood players for Notre Dame in a very, very long time. And I don't think his family did him any favors with kind of how he was groomed to be what he was. But I was a big fan of Jimmy Clausen as a player. Not fan, but you know what I mean? Like, loved his game. I really felt like if you'd have put him on some of the other teams, you put him on the 22 team, for example, put him on, the 2010, 2011, or 2012 teams, where he actually had real defenses and real offensive lines to play behind. Boy, I tell you what, man, had a coach that was a little bit better at getting winning play out of that. I think he could have had some really, really brilliant career in college. I really think he could have, even more so than what he was. Good way to start things off, Peter. I like that one, man. I'm going to go down to here from Indy. It just means more. Over under 27 touchdown passes for the starter. Over under 20 sacks for the D-line. Over under 30 to 35 20-plus yard gains on offense. So the 30 to 35 20-plus yard gains on offense, I mean, that's a super easy buy. Notre Dame blew way past that last year. Just last season alone in 16 games, Notre Dame had 65 gains of 20 yards or more just as an offense. They had 34 gains of 30 yards or more, and they were close to 20 on gains of 40 yards or more. They had 16. So I would say that perhaps you meant more something along the lines of pass game or run game. I'd be curious if there's a little bit of a clarification there, but that's an easy one. That's an easy buy. If you're referring to rushing, I would also go with the over there. I think the question that Notre Dame is going to have to answer this season is, can they get more big plays from the pass game? You look at their run game last year, they had 29 gains of 20 yards or more. That's a lot. That is a lot. And so 30 to 35, the question on that one, man, is going to be, I think the question is, can Notre Dame be more effective throwing the football? And if they're more effective throwing the football, I believe they're going to be even more explosive running the football. The difference is going to be, it's not going to be as many of the quarterback runs. So when you look at Notre Dame last year, and they had, I think it was 36, let me check here, 36 passing plays of 20 yards or more, 29 rushing plays of 30 yards or more, 20 yards or more. That should not be that close. It should be way more passing plays of 30 yards or more than running plays of 30 yards or more. That's just how it should be. And so I actually think if you get more big plays in the pass game, it's going to lead to more big plays in the run game. And I think that gets them a lot more, makes them a lot more dangerous. I think when you look at LSU, for example, in 2023, they had as many rushing plays of 29 yards or more in only 13 games that Notre Dame had in 2024 in 16 games. Now, a big part of that was, you had a quarterback that can make a lot of those big plays, but they led the nation in pass plays of 20 yards or more with 78. You had 40 pass plays of 30 yards or more, 22 pass plays of 40 yards or more, which opened up so many more of those rushing opportunities. So 30 to 35, I'll say this, 30, I'm going to take the over on 30. I'm going to sell on 35. Because if you look at last year, there's only one team that had more than 35 rushing plays of 20 yards or more last year. It was UNLV. Year before that, there was only one. Liberty had 41. Year before that, there was 3 with UAB, Ole Miss, and Florida State. Year before that, there was nobody. COVID year, there was only one team, North Carolina. 2019, you had 5. But again, that's with different clock rules. So I'm going to go over just because I think Notre Dame's going to play 15, 16 games and be even more explosive this year with a better offensive line and a more effective pass game. I think that's going to create more balance, which is going to create more big plays. So that's where I'm going to go. So let's go backwards. And then it would be over under for 20 sacks for the D line. Let me see what the number was this past season for Notre Dame. I want to look at that number before I make a guess on that. So 12 between Mills and Heinisch. You have 16 for Howard Cross, 19 for Boubacar, 22 when you had Junior. Let's see, 24 when you had Burnham, 25.5, 27 Onye and Young, 28.5 Logan Thomas. You have another one, 29.5 with him, 30.5 with Oben, 31.5. So you had 31.5 sacks last year from your defensive line. And so I'm going to definitely take the over on that one. That's a much easier one to look at. I don't see any way where their defensive line has a plus 10 drop in sacks next season. 27 touchdown passes for the starter. That is a lot tougher one because part of that is how deep into the season are we talking about this team playing? Because if we're talking about 13 games, that's pretty close to where they'll be. I think average about 2 a game is kind of where you think you'll be in a team that can run the ball as well as Notre Dame can run the ball. I'll say I think I have Notre Dame getting to the college football semifinals minimum. And with that being said, I think they average more than 2 a game, which I think gets them over 20, at least 2 a game, which gets them to 27. So over on the 27 touchdown passes for the starter, over on the 20 sacks for the D line, and I think I'm going to change my answer. I think I'm going to boy. No, I'm going to hold. I'm going to stay there. I'm going to go over on 30, under on 35. So I think they'll be somewhere in that range is where I predict that they'll be next year. So we haven't had a lot of over-under questions. We used to get a lot of over-under questions. We haven't gotten a lot of those in mailbags lately. So good stuff. Good stuff. It just means more. This is the poster formerly known as Audric Chestame and BK's last brain cell. So got a new, same picture, new name. I dig it. Tyler Evans with a super chat. Thank you, Tyler. What do you think the expectations are for Eddie George at Bowling Green, and what do you think of the hire? I absolutely love the hire. I've said this before. I'm not someone who believes that just because you played the game, that means you're good at coaching the game. I think that some people think that that's the case. I'm not one of those people that believes that. I think Eddie George is someone who showed promise at Tennessee State. Took over a program that wasn't very good. If you look at where Tennessee State was before he got there, in the Ron Reed era, they were 2-5 the year before he got there. During the COVID year, 2-8 the year before that, 4-5 the year before that. So in the 3 years before he took over, they were 8-18. And obviously, first couple years of coach's tenure there at Tennessee State were not great. Went 5-6 in his first year, which was still better than what they had done since he took over in 22. That was the best season they had since 2017. The next season, obviously, they took a little bit of a step back at 4-7. They went 6-5 in 2023. That included a loss to Notre Dame. And they had some very quality wins during that period of time. They lost to another ranked team in UT Martin. They were 6-2 at one point in time before losing their last 3 games. And then they come out this year and they go 9-4 and make the playoffs, make the NCAA playoffs, FCS playoffs. Their losses were to North Dakota State, who was obviously a heck of a team last year, UT Martin by a touchdown, Tennessee Tech, and then they lost to Montana in the college football playoffs. So I think they also won a game in the playoffs. Hold on real quick. Let me look. 2024 FCS football playoffs. I think they won their first game in the playoffs. Let me see the bracket here real quick, and then lost to Montana, who was let's see here. That's the other Montana. That's Montana State. Let's see here. Tennessee State. Okay, it was the first round. So they were 9-3 and then lost in the first round to Tennessee State or to Montana. So then that would mean that their win over Southeast Missouri State, who was ranked number 12 in the country, was a regular season game. So then they lost the playoffs to Montana State. So 9-4 season, really nice job. They hadn't been that good in a while. The last time they were that good was back in 2013 under Rod Reed. They went 10-4 that season. So I think he did a really nice job that showed that he can coach a little bit. And I think he, like all coaches, developed as a coach as he got more opportunities at it. I think the other thing that Eddie George has going for him is obviously he's going to Bowling Green. So he's going to be in Ohio. He's going to be in the MAC. He is an Ohio State legend. He played in Tennessee. He's a guy that's kind of in that region that you're going to want to recruit, is a legend, a Heisman Trophy winner. So he's going to be a big name. I think he's going to help with donors, and that's a big thing at a school like Bowling Green, is you've got to be able to raise money. And I think he's someone who, just on his name recognition alone and the fact that he's an Ohio State alum and the fact he's an NFL player, I think he's going to be an NFL Hall of Famer, I believe. I don't know what you guys think. Is Eddie George in the Hall of Fame yet? Let me see here. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame, but is he in the Pro Hall of Fame? Doesn't look like he is. I think he should. Well, I think he's at least in the conversation. The guy had over 10,000 yards rushing. But he's someone to me that I look at and say that's guy's going to have legend status in that area, that part of the country, and that'll allow him to raise a lot of money. That's going to be hugely important. And then, can he put a staff together? Can he recruit at that level? I mean, we don't really know. He doesn't have the benefit of having a son who was a really talented player, and obviously have some of the connections like Deion Sanders did with certain players like Travis Hunter. And it's not a knock on him. It's or a knock on Deion. It's just the reality that helped Coach Sanders make a quicker adjustment maybe than he otherwise would have from a wins-loss standpoint. Certainly helped having a bunch of D1 kids at an FCS school like Kevin Coleman and Shador and Travis Hunter. But he's gonna take over a program that was pretty good last year, lost a lot, like a lot of those MAC teams do year after year. But I think it's a good hire. I think it makes a lot of sense to hire a guy like this. It's going to be, because here's the other thing too, is, I mean, you got to understand that if Eddie George if you're going to hire a coach and he's going to have success, odds are he's going to leave somewhat soon. And so the calculation you have to make is, do you hire someone that can just come in and win and build the program up, or do you hire someone like an Eddie George who can not only potentially come in and win, but come in and have an impact off the field as well? Because you want that new coach to come in and have some major fundraising opportunities, and that's going to have an impact long after they're there. But the other thing about a guy like Eddie George is, with his status, with his connections in the NFL, he's probably going to have a better opportunity to convince some of their better players to stay, the same way that like a Deion Sanders would, or some other coaches that have more of that name recognition are able to do. I think that factors into the conversation as well, and has to be accounted for when we're talking about, what kind of hire is this? And so I think all of those things make it a great hire. But anytime you're hiring at a place like Bowling Green, there's always some risk, and there's risk with Eddie George. He's only been coaching 4 years. He only has 2 winning seasons. So there's certainly some risk involved, but I think the potential reward for it is far greater than any potential risk. So overall, I like the hire, and my expectations are that, keep winning. Take them to, that's the whole goal when you're at a place like Bowling Green. It's compete for the MAC title and take your team to a bowl game. That's really what it comes down to. That's what you're being hired to do, and I think that's something he's certainly capable of. I'm curious to see how the recruiting part's going to go, but I think it's a very strong hire. All right, good start so far to the questions today. We got another one from Ballpeen Shillelagh. How much control does a head coach or coordinator have over the way position coaches make personnel decisions? It seems like challenge everything isn't fully accepted by everyone on the staff. I would agree with that, and I think part of that is it's not accepted necessarily always by the head coach, and that's sometimes going to just be part of it. And it's somewhat understandable that not every circumstance is treated the same. I think I've told this one before, but I had a player of mine that I coached at Christopher Newport, and I had to be very careful with how I went at him, because he was a kid that if I raised my voice or yelled at him across the field, which I did with most players, because I was one of those coaches that felt like when you do something and you're down the field, number one, I want immediate feedback, but number two, I'm going to yell it. Not that I'm yelling at you, but I'm saying it loudly so that other receivers can hear what I'm saying, so that it can be corrected by everybody, because my guys were always supposed to be watching what the guy in front of them was doing. But he didn't handle that very well, and he would get his head down, and it would really bother him. And so, I knew enough about his upbringing to understand maybe why that was, and why he was that way, and why he reacted that way, especially to someone like me. Whereas I had another kid on my roster, a kid named Curfew. His name was Curfew Spade. And, Curfew's dad, I believe, was a drill sergeant. And so Curfew was just someone who, if I didn't speak to him in a certain way, I don't know that it always sunk in. And so I would be a lot harder on Curfew than I was the other player, because I just felt that was the way that each of them needed to be communicated to in order to be for them to receive the message the same way. And so the other player asked me, after his career was over, he was looking at getting into coaching, and he asked me, and he was bothered by the fact, he goes, "Why didn't you treat me the same as Curfew?" And I said, "Well, you're going to learn something as a coach, that this notion that every player should be treated the same is one of the biggest lies in all of coaching." I said, the reality is that you can't treat every player the same. I said, my motto, my philosophy was, I'm going to treat every player fairly, but I'm not going to treat every player the same, because how every player learns is not always the same. And so there's always circumstances where you could say, hey, listen, if you miss this, or you don't do this, or whatever, you're gonna pay a certain consequence. Well, I've heard, Lou Holt said this is, be careful how many rules you have, because the more rules you have and the more type of punishment you have, you're setting yourself up to be hurt, because maybe one of your star players doesn't live up to a certain rule, and now all of a sudden you gotta be stuck with, okay, do I suspend this player knowing the impact it's going to have on the rest of the team, or do I just say, hey, I'm not going to punish him, and now you set that standard for the rest of the team? But there's always some kind of leeway you have. But to answer your specific question of how much control does a head coach or coordinator have, and they have as much control as they want. I mean, that's the reality of it is a head coach can always walk into a room and say, hey, I know you plan on starting that guy, but I want this guy to start. And you have to start that guy. Or you can walk in and say, hey, listen, you need to play this guy X amount of snaps, or I want this guy in the rotation, or, this guy needs to do this, or this guy needs to do that. And when the head coach says that, that's what you do. And that's how things go. I mean, he's the head coach. That's kind of life. If you don't like it, then go be a head coach somewhere else. Get your own job or go work for a head coach who doesn't do that. I mean, there's all types of things you can do if you don't like that, but that's just the reality of it. And most head coaches aren't that way. Sometimes I was told this by a coach at Ohio State when Urban Meyer was there. He said Urban would have certain players, he would, like freshmen especially, he'd say, hey, listen, I want to make sure so-and-so gets at least 10 snaps a game. Sometimes it's because they promised that guy at least 10 snaps a game, but other times it was a way of development for Coach Meyer, where he would basically say, like, listen, this kid is talented. This kid can help us. We've got to, expedite the development process by making sure we're working him into the rotation, because maybe it doesn't help us a ton now, but it's going to help us down the road once that guy gets some experience under his belt. And that's something that happened with Chris Olave, for example. They kind of force-fed him some snaps early in the season, not a ton, but the more he played, even a little bit at a time, the more effective he was later in the season. And then you saw kind of what he did at the end of the year, and he really helped that football team win. So I think those are things where I want a head coach to do that. I want to know that the head coach is going into the room and saying, hey, listen, we need to make sure that we're getting so-and-so the football. We need to make sure that so-and-so is getting opportunities to play. We need to make sure that so-and-so is we're really focusing on the development piece for that kid. And I'll give you a perfect example of what I want to see from Notre Dame this season. I absolutely will be ticked off if I find out that there was never a conversation between Marcus Freeman, Mike Denbrock, and Mike Brown, for example, with Cam Williams, where it's, hey, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get him going. Now, Cam has to live up to his end of the bargain, as I mentioned yesterday, but some guys are just too good to not play. I'll be disappointed if I found out that there wasn't some kind of conversation about Bryce Young in that regard last year, where, hey, listen, we got to figure out ways to get that kid going early. And even if it's a small role, but it's your job to make sure that kid's ready to play. I'll be disappointed if that conversation isn't had between Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown, or Marcus Freeman and Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown. And I think sometimes that's part of being a good coach is, as I said yesterday, you sometimes got these players that are just too good not to play. They're just too good to just say, hey, we're just not going to play this guy. He's not ready yet. He doesn't know the offense like these other guys. He doesn't know this like these other guys. He can't run routes like these other guys. That's fine, but there comes a point in time, and I said this about Golden Tate all the way back in 2007. I said, man, kid caught 6 passes as a freshman. There's no way you couldn't have got him on a team that stunk. There's no way you can justify to me not playing him more than you did in 2007. Or you're worried about losing? That should have been out the window by the 3rd game of the year. A guy like him, well, he doesn't know the routes. Then freaking that's your job. Teach him how to run. He only needs to run 3 routes. Golden Tate only needed to run like 3 routes to help you in 2007. He was that kind of player. It's imperative that you do those things and get those kind of guys ready. And so that's where a head coach needs to step in, because in fairness to the position coaches, if I spend all my time on this guy and he's not quite ready, and then all of a sudden, let's say as a unit, we're not playing great early on, well, it's because I spent all this time with this young guy. I'm being a bit hyperbolic on it. Then I'm going to be in trouble because my unit maybe isn't playing up to potential because this kid's making more mistakes early on than maybe a veteran player would have made. Then you could get in trouble. That's why sometimes it's got to come from the head coach or the coordinator. It's got to be a conversation where he goes to the position coach and says, listen, I need this guy to play. I need you to get this guy ready to play. Well, coach, what if he does this? Hey, listen, it's your job to get him ready to play. I can live with some mistakes early on. It's your job to make sure that you get those corrected as quickly as possible. I think you have to have those conversations. But I think it has to sometimes come from the head coach. And I know that Marcus Freeman has this thing where he's like, you're the head coach of your room and all that kind of stuff, but you're still the head football coach. And you need to make sure that those players are still being like, we haven't forgotten about those players as a head coach and say, listen, man, I know he may be 10th on the depth chart when it comes to how he knows the offense and route running, but he's number 1 or number 2 on the depth chart and just the skills that God gave him. We need to figure out, we need to come to some sort of middle ground and get that kid on the football field. Because if the head coach is saying that, number one, then hey, my job now depends on getting done what the head coach is asking me to get done. But it also in some ways takes some pressure off of that coach because now he doesn't have to be the one to make that decision. And the head coach now understands that there may be some opportunities there that he's going to maybe make some mistakes, and you got to learn to live with that. And when it comes from the boss man, it can take some pressure off you as a coach. Another one from Peter Freibert. Peter says, Brian, you mentioned earlier this week about the 2009 team and Michael Floyd's injury. If Michael Floyd doesn't get injured, does that team win 10-plus games and make a BCS bowl game and win that game? Why? The answer is no, they don't. I mean, the 2009 football team was a hot mess, just an absolute hot mess. I mean, and Michael Floyd still came back and played that year. Like, he got hurt, I think it was third game of the year against Michigan State. And so at that point in time, Notre Dame was 2-1. They went out and beat Purdue the next week without him. They beat Washington 37-30 in overtime in a game that Jimmy Clausen passed for over 400 yards that year. I'm trying to find Michael Floyd's game log, but I think he came back. He played, I think, 7 games that year. Give me a second to pull this game log up. I think 7 games that year. What did I say? 9 touchdowns and in 7 games. So let's go to Michael Floyd's game log in 2009, and that would have been his sophomore year. So he got hurt against Michigan State. He had 7 catches for 131 yards the week before against Michigan. He had 4 catches for 189 yards in the game before that and against Nevada. He had 2 for 38 and a touchdown in the first half against Michigan State before getting hurt. And his first 2 games back, his first 2 games were November 7th, November 14th, and November 21st, November 28th. So he came back for the last 4 games. And he had 10 for 141, 7 for 107, 8 for 104, and 6 for 85. 2 touchdowns. Think about that. Michael Floyd's worst game statistically from a total production standpoint, outside of the game he got hurt in when he played a half, was 6 catches for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns in 6 games. So I'm not counting the one where he got hurt. I mean, think about the numbers Michael Floyd would have put up if he didn't miss those games that year. But look, they were 2-1 in games he played early in the season, and then they were 0-4 in games he played late in the season. He had 10 catches for 141 yards and a touchdown against Navy. And they lost 23-21. He had 7 catches for 107 yards in a loss to Pitt, and they lost 27-22. He had 8 catches for 104 yards and a touchdown against UConn, and they lost 33-30 in overtime. I mean, they weren't losing games because they couldn't throw the football. They weren't losing games because their offense. I mean, they were losing games, their pass game. They were losing games because their offensive line sucked. They were losing games because they couldn't run the football. They were losing games because their defense sucked. I mean, in the Navy game, they lost 23-21. Jimmy Clausen went 37 of 51, 452 yards, and Floyd had 10 catches for 141 yards. Golden Tate had 9 catches for 132 yards, and they lost. They only scored 21 points. Why? They ran the ball 20 times for 60 yards. I mean, that was just kind of who that team was. They just they were an incredibly disappointing team when it came to the physicality, running the football, playing defense. Jimmy just constantly on the run for his life. Scored 22 points in a loss to Pitt. Jimmy goes 27 of 42 for 283 yards. Floyd goes for 7 for 107. Golden Tate goes for 9 for 113, and they only scored 22 points. And among those 22 points was a punt return touchdown by Golden Tate, I believe. That's how they got their last touchdown. So they only had 16 up to that point in time in the fourth quarter. Their defense stunk. Their offensive line stunk. Jimmy was constantly running for his life, as I mentioned before. Against UConn, Jimmy goes 30 of 45 for 329 yards, 2 touchdowns. They run for Golden Tate has a 9 for 123. Michael Floyd runs for 8 for 104, but Notre Dame only rushes for 123 yards and 3.5 yards per carry against UConn, who with that win improved to 5-5. Their offensive line stunk and their defense stunk. They gave up 231 rushing yards to UConn in that game. That's why Notre Dame kept losing that year. If Michael Floyd is playing that year, they probably win a little more than they do, because I don't know that I think he would have been in a little bit more, maybe more of an offensive rhythm. Maybe they beat Navy, maybe they beat UConn, but they don't beat USC even if he plays. They lost to Michigan with him. I don't think they beat Pitt, and I don't think they beat Stanford. So at best, that team is 9-3 if he stays healthy. But I think 8-4 is probably the best that team was going to do. And it's not like Golden Tate wasn't lighting the world on fire when Michael Floyd was out. I mean, he was. I mean, they were still passing for a bunch of yards and all that. It's just, there were so many other problems with that team. It wasn't like, man, they were on the verge of being great if it wasn't for Michael Floyd getting hurt. I mean, they had Michael Floyd and lost to Tate Forcier. Think about that. I mean, think about that Michigan game in 2009 where Notre Dame jumps out to a big lead and they give up a kick return by, I think it was Daryl Stoneham. And, Jimmy goes 25 of 42, 336 yards, 8 touchdowns, 8.0 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns. Armando Allen goes 21 for 139 rushing. Michael Floyd goes 7 for 131 and a touchdown. Golden Tate goes 9 for 115 and 2 touchdowns. And they lost 38-34. That team was going to lose a lot of games like that because their defense was a train wreck and their offensive line was not good. So, end of the day, we're always going to hold that team back. And it wasn't just, man, if only Michael Floyd wouldn't have got hurt, they'd have won 4 more games. That wasn't going to be the case. It really wasn't. Got one from John A1. John asks, does Jeremiah Love have all the stones in Thanos' gauntlet for a running back, meaning speed and quickness, power, contact balance, ball skills, vision, and blocking? I mean, he's got all those traits, John. I think some of them are better than others. Speed and quickness is outstanding. Power is good, right? Pretty good. At times it's really good. At times I'd like to see him do it a little bit more, but that comes with being a young player. Contact balance, pretty good. Ball skills, he's got it, I believe, but we just need to see more of it. That's probably the one that's the one that I kind of have the most on. I think it's there. We just haven't seen him get a chance to use it a ton. Vision certainly has very, very good vision. Blocking, his pass blocking needs to get better, certainly, but his run blocking was quite good this year. And the pass blocking is understandable because they just don't have him do it a whole lot. And so I'll say yeah, although the ball skills and some of the other things that are pretty good, that they can get better. And that's why I say, like, this isn't a criticism of Jeremiah Love. This is a good thing because it means as good as he was last year, there's still another level for him to get to, John. And I think there's a chance for him to be even better than even what we saw this season. Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, says, realistically, what is a great surprise that could happen in this year's recruiting class, and what could be a disaster in this year's recruiting class? I mean, I can't sit there and say that this particular player is going to be a surprise, because if I felt that, it wouldn't really be a surprise. If I knew that they were going to get this kid that, hey guys, I know that they're going to get this kid that nobody thinks they're going to get, that wouldn't really make it a surprise. It would mean, okay, sure, they're going to get that guy. Maybe some national people don't think they're going to get him, but it wouldn't be a surprise to us. You guys wouldn't be surprised by it because if I'm not surprised by it, you're probably not going to be surprised by it. So, so I can't give a specific player, but here's what I will say. Generally speaking, I think that Notre Dame fans are going to be pleasantly surprised with how good one of the two problem positions is this season. One of those two is going to be much better than people think, whether it's the D-line or whether it's wide receiver. One of those two is going to be a lot better than you think. Potentially both. But right now I'm only comfortable saying one of. And if I had to err on the side of if I had to pick one right now, I'd pick D-line. What would be a total disaster in this year's recruiting class? That I'm wrong about both of those. Both of them end up being disappointments. I think that would be a bit of a disaster for this team. I think they can sustain a down year running back. They can sustain a down year linebacker. They can even sustain a down year in the secondary. Tight end, I think they need a really good year, and I expect them to have a really good year at tight end. I love the tight end board. But they can't afford to have a down year at receiver, and they can't afford to have a down year at defensive line. So if those two things end up not being what we hope they are, then that for me would be that would be a disaster in this year's recruiting class. Because those are the things could really keep this team from taking that next step as a program. So those are my two big potential disasters there. Very good question, Josh. All right. Apologize for the quick wardrobe change, but that collared shirt that I had on, I think part of the tag was still in there. And when there's a shirt with tags, it really drives me nuts. So I fully apologize about that. Get back on track here. All right. Okay, we finished with Josh's question. Let's get back up here. Let's get another one from Peter because he had so many good ones there. So Peter says, do you think we will see a Heisman Trophy winner under Coach Marcus Freeman? Oh, boy. I think it's possible. I mean, Notre Dame's had some really dynamic players in the past that haven't won the Heisman Trophy. They have plenty. They've had some guys that have been close. Brady was close. Manti was very close. I'm going to say yes, that they will. I'm not a mind reader or can't predict the future, but the reality is this is what I always say. You need a top-notch skill player at quarterback, running back, and you need to be a team that's competing for championships. I think they're going to be competing for championships. I think they're recruiting both of those positions very well. I said before the 2024 season that I expect Notre Dame to win a championship in the next 3 years. I think that they'll win a championship in the next 3 years. For that to happen, I think that there's guys at quarterback and running back that have a chance to be really special. And they'll at least have a big say in that. If that's true and I'm right on that, then sure, they'll have a guy that'll be in contention. But some of that is just luck. We've seen guys win the Heisman, lose the Heisman Trophy, where it's like if you'd have put them in any season 2-3 years before, 2-3 years after, they're a no-brainer, but they just happen to be coming along that year that there's just that magical season. I've said this before that I think Christian McCaffrey deserved the Heisman Trophy in 2015 that went to Derrick Henry. The reality is they both had historic seasons. Derrick Henry had a phenomenal season. Christian McCaffrey had a phenomenal season. If you put them back in different seasons, both of those guys win it hands down in other seasons. And it just so happened that they both just had monster seasons in, at the same time. And that just kind of happens. With all due respect to some guys that have won it in other years, I don't know that either of them win it if as good as Lamar was in 2016, I don't know that Lamar wins it if he's competing against Derrick Henry and a healthy Christian McCaffrey. I mean, Christian had an okay year in 2015, but if he'd had another 3,000-plus yard season like he had, and there's a running back at Alabama that has 2,200 yards and 28 touchdowns like Derrick Henry had, I don't know that he necessarily wins that. I don't know that Baker wins it in 2017. I don't, there's a lot of years where you could look and say, hey, I don't know if that guy wins that if he has to compete against those guys. And then you look at Derrick Henry, and he only had 1,800 total points. Lamar had 2,144. Baker had almost 24. Kyler Murray had almost 22. Joe Burrow had over 26. Not until Devontae Smith in 18 did you have another guy that was below 2,000. Does that mean that Derrick Henry's season 1 is dominant? No, it just means that there were 2 other really dominant players that year that took votes. And, of course, Christian McCaffrey being one. So there's always a little bit of that luck factor to go into it as well, that you better hope that you're in one of those seasons where you're having a really great season, but some other guy's just having a truly historic season. I mean, I've said that a lot about Brady Quinn's 05 season, that if Brady Quinn was playing in other years instead of 05, I think he's got a much better shot to win the Heisman Trophy instead of finishing 4th. But you had just Reggie Bush had an exceptional year that year. Vince Young had an exceptional year that year. You had Matt Leinart. In other years, I think Brady has a much better shot. Like here's my thing. If Brady has the season in 06 like he had in 05. So think about this. In 2006, Brady Quinn threw for 3,400 yards, 37 touchdowns, 7 picks. Notre Dame goes 10-2 in the regular season. Both losses were blowouts. He finishes 3rd in the Heisman Trophy, gets 782 votes. The year before that, Notre Dame goes 9-2 in the regular season, lose 1 game in overtime, lose a historic all-time great game to USC, throws for 32 touchdowns and 7 picks, but has 3,919 yards, and he only gets 191 votes. Why? Because he's going against Reggie Bush, Vince Young, and Matt Leinart. Matt Leinart was the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. Reggie Bush had one of the great all-time individual seasons, and Vince Young had a phenomenal season. In 06, it's Troy Smith, who passed for 2,500 yards, and Darren McFadden, who rushed for 1,600 yards and 14 touchdowns. If Notre Dame was the team in 06 they were in 05, if Brady Quinn had the season in 06 like he had in 05, Brady Quinn walks away with the Heisman Trophy, in my opinion. It's just sometimes that's the case. I mean, I would argue that Matt Leinart was better in 05 than the year he won the Heisman. In 05, I mean, I thought Matt Leinart was tremendous in 2005. Passed for almost 500 more yards in 05 than he did the year before. He finished 3rd in the Heisman Trophy voting, way behind the first 2 guys, because it was Vince Young and Reggie Bush. So some of it's just luck. Some of it's just luck and timing, which means there's a chance they'll get there. I think there's a chance they'll get there. So, yeah. Okay, let's go to this question from ND. It just means more. Yes, because if Kingston Viliama Asa or Jalen Sneed leads the defense in sacks with their number being at least 7, how would you predict the defense played at the end of the year? I would say that it tells me that the defense was good, but not as dominant it was the year before. Now, there's a chance that you could get 7 sacks. Your leader could have 7 sacks, and you're a really good defense. And I've pointed this out before. There have been seasons in recent years where, and I'll pull some of them up, but there's been seasons in recent years where, teams that had a ton of sacks, led the country in sacks or top 10 in sacks, didn't have like that one individually great pass rusher. That's been true. So it doesn't necessarily mean that means you're going to be good. It just means that it can happen. Penn State 2023, Their defense finished number one in the country in sacks that year, 49. They were number one in sacks per game also. And their leader in sacks only had 7.5 sacks, Adesif Isaac. Number two was Abdul Carter at 4.5, who's a linebacker. And number three was tied for number two with him was Johnny Dixon, a corner. So certainly there's an opportunity that you could still be a great defense, and your leader's only got 7 sacks, and it's a linebacker. Certainly possible. I just don't know that the makeup of the Notre Dame team is going to be that. In 2023, Michigan had a great defense. Michigan finished 11th in the country in sacks that year. They weren't quite as high as that in sacks per game. They were 28th in sacks per game. Their leader in sacks was Jalen Harrell. They had 39 sacks that year. Their leader was Jalen Harrell with 6.5 sacks. So it's possible to be a really good defense. But I don't know that Notre Dame's built in a way to where a linebacker leads them with 7 sacks and their defense is great. I also think that what that likely means is that there's either Bryce Young doesn't emerge as a difference maker or Boubacar's not healthy. That's also what that tells me. If he doesn't have 7 sacks next year, that tells me that he wasn't healthy. He was on pace for 10 this year. And yeah, that's what that tells me. All right. Jason Smith got my IB flag this morning. That's awesome, dude. That's very awesome. Glad that came. Glad that you got that. So love it. Absolutely love it. So let me see here. Let me get to some more questions here. All right. Peter Freibert, besides Manti Te'o in 2012, do you think there was a defensive player that should have won the Heisman but didn't? I don't think Manti should have won the Heisman Trophy in 2012. I thought Manti was, maybe the most impactful football player that year, maybe. But Johnny Manziel in 2012 was exceptionally good. So I had no issue with Johnny winning. I mean, Johnny Manziel threw for 3,700 yards, had 26 passing touchdowns. He also rushed for 1,400 yards and 21 touchdowns for a Texas A&M team that went 11-2. So I beat Alabama. So I have no issue with Johnny winning that year. And I'm someone who doesn't personally care much for Johnny Manziel. I don't like his attitude. I still don't like his attitude. I think he epitomizes everything that's wrong with just everything wrong with the modern athlete. He's everything that's wrong with it. It's all about me. It's all about, just getting mine and all. And I just dislike so much about Johnny Manziel, but you got to separate your personal feelings for him as a dude, in my opinion, and because he didn't do anything that at the time we knew that was like immoral. I just didn't like him. And I just thought he had a crap attitude, but his team won a lot of games. He had a big win, and he was brilliant in that offense and statistically exceptional. So I had no problem winning it. So I even that year, I don't think I've said this before. I think it was it what year was it? Was it 2009 that, let me go. There was a season where I think it was 2009 where I felt that the most dominant player in college football by far was Ndamukong Suh. I thought there was other good players. I thought Toby Gerhart. I think Toby Gerhart, if it was going to go to an offensive player that year, should have gone to Toby Gerhart. Colt McCoy had a nice year. I thought the most dominant player in college football that year was Ndamukong Suh, and I didn't think it was all that close. I thought that if there was ever a year that he was going to win, that there was going to be a defensive guy win the Heisman Trophy, it should have been that year. 85. Think about this. For a D tackle, he had 85 tackles, including 52 solo tackles, 21 tackles for loss, and 12 sacks, and he had an interception. And the other thing too is you watch the film, and he was just, I mean, he was just exceptionally dominant that season for Nebraska. He was so good for Nebraska, and I thought he was someone who should have won the Heisman Trophy that season. I thought he was by far the most dominant player in college football that season. There's been some other guys along the way that I thought should have been in the conversation for it. I thought Julius Peppers, his last year in 2001, was a guy that should have got a lot more Heisman Trophy consideration, like a lot more. That was a really weak Heisman Trophy year. If you go back and remember, it's the year Eric Crouch won it in a year where he had more interceptions than touchdowns. Think about that, 2001. I know Eric Crouch was a really good runner and all those type of things, but 1,100 yards passing, 1,500 yards passing, 7 touchdowns, 1,100 yards rushing with 18 touchdowns. So you only account for 25 touchdowns and 2,600 yards. You're the Heisman Trophy winner. Well, who were you going to give it to that year? Rex Grossman, Ken Dorsey, Joey Harrington. None of those guys were really dominant players, which is why I always felt like that was a year where a Julius Peppers or maybe even a Dwight Freeney should have been someone who got the Heisman Trophy. I think especially Julius Peppers. I just thought he was an exceptionally good player, exceptionally dominant player in his career. I thought Dwight Freeney had a brilliant career at Syracuse. So maybe one of those guys should have won it. That was a year where a defensive player should have won it based on not just the fact that that they were the best player in college football, because I think they both were. I think it was also because it was a really bad year when it came to dominant offensive players. So those are a couple that I thought should have been in the conversation. I think another guy that I don't know that he would count for what you're asking here for is I felt that Champ Bailey was a guy that should have been in greater consideration for a Heisman Trophy when he was coming up in his last year. I think it was who won at 98. Let me pull this up. It was Ricky Williams won at 98. And Ricky was exceptional. There's no doubt about it. 2,100 yards rushing, 27 touchdowns, 5.9 yards per carry. Champ finished 7th that year. But Champ Bailey was, in my opinion, the most dominant college football player in the country that year. Champ Bailey also caught 47 passes for 744 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also rushed for 84 yards this year. He also had 261 yards on punt returns that year. He had, kick returns that year. He's a guy that had over 1,000 yards of offense that season, or all-purpose yards, kicking or rushing, receiving, and returns. And he's also a lockdown, lights-out, elite defensive player. So that's another year where I felt the best player in college football was a defensive guy. With all due respect to Rick Williams. And I don't sit there and say, like, oh, total screw job like I do other years. But it's like if I had a vote, I would have voted for Champ Bailey that year. So there's been some other years. I don't know that you're going to see much of that from just a pure defensive player. Like Travis Hunter, if he just plays defense this year, doesn't sniff the Heisman Trophy. If he just plays offense this year, he doesn't sniff the Heisman Trophy. He won it because he did both. And I still think you need that to be a Heisman Trophy winner. I think the only reason a guy like Manti Te'o was second is because he played in Notre Dame. If Manti Te'o would have had that same exact season, we've seen linebackers with far more dominant statistical seasons than Manti never sniffed the Heisman Trophy. It's because Manti did it in Notre Dame. So for all the people that think there's still a bias against Notre Dame, there is in some circles, but there's still a lot of benefits to playing at Notre Dame and some of those other areas when it comes to things like that. It's got to another one from John A1. Could any Notre Dame quarterback in the past 10 years, other than Riley Leonard, have led Notre Dame to the national title game appearance last season? Boy, John, that is a really good question. So let's set the terms. 10 years is 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, right? So from 15 to 24. So you're talking about Deshaun Kaiser, it's hard to say Malik. I mean, I think Malik had some of the same characteristics that Riley had, and leadership and a dynamic runner, and throwing. He had a different type of throwing skill set than Riley. But it's hard to really say Malik because he had 3 starts, and so it's really hard to say for sure he could have done that. But he had similar traits. Brandon Wimbush, no. Ian Book, no. Jack Cohn, no. Tyler Buckner, probably. He's another one that if he stays healthy and he develops correctly, maybe he does, but he didn't, and so he doesn't. So I'd say the only guy that I would even consider would be Malik Zaire, and that's hard for me to even say that one just because he only started 3 games. But I think that they needed a dynamic playmaker quarterback this year. That's what this team needed to be successful. They didn't have great pass game weapons that this season, and to where you could have put like a, let's say a Jimmy Clausen, if you were to say 20 years, and he's not going to. I mean, he's going to struggle behind the offensive line pass pro issues. He's going to, receivers are still going to drop balls and things like that. So I don't know that. Yeah. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and think through that. But my answer is probably no. I don't think so. I really don't think so. Answer a quick question that Andrew Gilmore said. He just said 1998 Ricky Williams is one of the most dominant rushing seasons ever. Was Texas even good? Yeah, they were good. They were 9-3. I don't know that I agree that it was one of the most dominant seasons ever. It was a very good season, but I mean, we've seen plenty of guys have better results than that. I think Wisconsin and Ohio State alone the last 7-8 years have had many seasons where they were just as good, if not better than that. So I'm not taking anything away from Ricky Williams. He was a phenomenal player, and that was a phenomenal year. I just think the best player in college football that year was Champ Bailey. So let's see. Let's look at this. Leading rusher, college football. All right. So let's go look and see what where Ricky Williams single season ranks in his 2019 season ranks. It's not even the top 10 of all-time rushing yards. And let's see, in fairness, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those seasons have come since then. But yeah, I don't. Ricky was 15th, and see, at the time he would have been 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. At the time, it would have been the 5th best single season in just total rushing yards. So if you look at the context of the time, at the time, it would have been a heck of a season, considered a heck of a season. But it's 4 years after Rashawn Salam put up very similar numbers. It's 2 years after Troy Davis put up even better numbers at Iowa State. So it's not like we hadn't seen. It was 2 years before LaDainian Tomlinson had an even better season. So it's not like we're sitting here and it was just something that, has never happened before. So I don't know that yeah. I don't know that it was, I would call it quite what you said. It was an outstanding season. No question about it. But yeah, I still would have given it the champ. And just because I'm saying that also doesn't mean that I don't think that that he was very good. Speaking of Heisman trophies, we have a question out here from Charlie Weiss's Last Belt Loop. Who was the worst Heisman winner 2000s to now? If we're talking about from the 2000s, then I would probably say Jason White. And what was that, 03, 04? What year was Jason White? Was he the 04 Heisman Trophy winner? It's either 03 or 04. I'd say he's pretty close to that one for me. 04 is Matt Leinart. Duh, we just talked about that. Jason White in 03. I mean, the numbers were there. I thought he was a very overrated quarterback. I thought I would have given it to Larry Fitzgerald, who had 22 receiving touchdowns, 1,600 yards, or Eli Manning that season. I thought both of those guys deserved it over him. I thought if you were going to give it to a guy just based off numbers, I'd have given it to Phillip Rivers. I mean, Phillip Rivers had almost 4,500 yards that year, 34 touchdowns and 7 picks. I thought there was a lot of guys you could have given it to over him. So if you look at from 2000 on, you had Chris Wenke in 2000, totally fine with that. I thought he deserved it that season. 2001, Eric Crouch. I wouldn't say Eric Crouch was one of the worst because I understood him winning it. I didn't have a problem with it. It wasn't a great Heisman Trophy year, and he was a dominant player on a dominant team. They did play for the national title that year, and he did what he was asked to do. And so I have no problem with him winning it, but he wasn't great. Carson Palmer was outstanding in 2002. I talked about Jason White, and then you have Leinart, Bush in back-to-back seasons. Troy Smith, to me, was one of the – I don't want to say worst because Troy Smith was a very good player, but I think Troy Smith had one of the most undeserving Heisman Trophy seasons, if I'm being honest. I mean, he passed for 2,500 yards and 30 touchdowns and only rushed for 200 yards that season. I mean, think about that. In the 2000s, a quarterback with only 31 total touchdowns and only 2,700 yards of offense won the Heisman Trophy. I mean, Brady Quinn had over 700 more yards than him. Brady Quinn had more passing touchdowns than Troy Smith had total touchdowns by 6. And then, then you throw in the fact that Brady also rushed for 2 touchdowns. Brady had 39 touchdowns to Troy Smith's 31. Brady had, 3,497 yards of offense, whereas Troy Smith had, it'd be 2,746 total yards. Why did he win the Heisman Trophy that year? And if you didn't want to give it to Brady Quinn because they had 2 blowout losses, fine. Give it to Darren McFadden, who rushed for 1,600 yards that year, had 14 touchdowns, and also had production in a lot of other areas. I never understood. Darren McFadden also had a kick return touchdown that year, had over 200 yards on kick returns. Darren McFadden in 2006 also passed for 3 touchdowns that season in 2006. Darren McFadden also had 149 receiving yards and another touchdown that season. I've never understood why Troy Smith got that. So I would say least deserving Heisman Trophy winners, but Troy Smith was still a good football player. I would still take Troy Smith over Jason White any day of the week. I just didn't think he was a guy that should have won the Heisman Trophy. Also, somebody said Ty Detmer. I don't think Ty Detmer is one of the worst. I think he shouldn't have won it, but that's also way before the 2000s. 2007, Tim Tebow was outstanding. 2008, Sam Bradford was brilliant that year, 4,700 yards, 50 touchdowns. Mark Ingram was a very good player. I didn't think he should have won it. I thought Toby Gerhart should have won it. Toby Gerhart rushed for over 200 yards more than Mark Ingram. Toby Gerhart had 11 more touchdowns than Mark Ingram. I thought Ndamukong Suh should have been the winner. So I think that I would put Mark Ingram in that category with Troy Smith of least deserving, but he was still a really good football player for the team that won the national title. Cam Newton certainly deserved his. Robert Griffin III deserved his. Johnny Manziel was outstanding. Jameis Winston was outstanding. Marcus Mariota was outstanding. Derrick Henry was outstanding. Lamar was outstanding. Baker was outstanding. Kyler Murray was outstanding. Joe Burrow was outstanding. Devontae Smith was outstanding. Bryce Young was outstanding. Caleb Williams is outstanding. Jaden Daniels is outstanding. And this year, Travis Hunter was outstanding. So in the last 10-plus years, all the Heisman Trophy winners have been brilliant players. I think there were years where it was debatable, like should have won it. This year's one of those. I thought it was debatable. I personally would have voted for Ashton Genty. That doesn't mean I don't think Travis Hunter was exceptional, because he was exceptional. 2015, I would have voted for Christian McCaffrey over Derrick Henry. Had no problem with Derrick Henry winning it. I just would have voted for somebody else. And there's been other years like that where, I've had issues maybe with the voting from the standpoint of I thought somebody else should have got it. But there was never any issue in regard to was that player brilliant or not. I still think that Devontae Smith should have won by more. I don't think Devontae Smith should have had less than 2,000 points. I still don't think 221 voters thought he was second. Like Mac Jones had more second place votes than Devontae Smith. way more third place votes. But obviously he had a lot of first place votes. But you had a lot of people. So let's see, 294 of the points available were for people who did not think Devontae Smith deserved to win the Heisman Trophy. I thought that was a no-brainer season. But so there's been a lot of that, but we haven't seen a lot of Eric Crouches and Jason Whites, Gino Toretta's win the Heisman Trophy in the last 10 to 15 years. It's been far more deserving candidates, I would say. What was the last year that I was talking about? There, 09, again, is probably in the last 15 years. I'd say probably 09 is the year that I think is most debatable, and then 06 are the years that I think are most debatable, where I just really didn't like the guy that won it, as far as I thought it was really a bad rankings situation. But both of those players were still outstanding football players. Troy Smith had no business winning the Heisman Trophy in 06. He was still an outstanding college football player. I mean, so it's different than like a guy like Gino Toretta, where I'm like, that dude's not even a top 3 or 4 on his offense, much less his team. Like, I still don't understand how Gino Toretta won the Heisman Trophy. I think that's one of the biggest jokes of all time when it comes to Heisman Trophy winners, when he won it in 1992. And here's the thing, you can't even say, yeah, he won it in a bad year, like we've seen with some other guys, where I've pointed out some years where it just, yeah, maybe, maybe this guy wasn't a great player, but who are you going to give it to? Rex Grossman, but when you look at Gino Toretta, he won it in a year where Marshall Faulk and Garrison Hurst had monster seasons. I mean, think about that. He won it over Marshall Faulk in 1992, in a year where Marshall Faulk rushed for over 1,600 yards that season. Had 15 rushing touchdowns that season. Like, he won it over those guys. Think about that. Marshall Faulk was brilliant. He won it in a year where Garrison Hurst in the SEC rushed for 1,500 yards and 19 touchdowns, also caught 22 passes for 324 yards and 2 more touchdowns. An SEC running back had 21 touchdowns and almost 1,900 yards that year, and Gino Toretta won the freaking Heisman Trophy. Like, that was a joke. Barely over 3,000 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 7 picks. That's back when it was even worse. I mean, Reggie Brooks that year was more deserving in it. Reggie didn't deserve to win the Heisman because, as great as he was, Marshall Faulk and Garrison Hurst were just better players that year. But to give the trophy to Gino Toretta, I still think is probably the biggest joke ever. 1990 is one of those years where I didn't think that Ty Detmer should have won it. I think Rocket Ismail should have won it, and I don't think it's close. But Ty Detmer was still really good. The 28 picks was just a byproduct of the offense. I mean, that's just kind of how it was. But I thought he was still a really good player. But so there's been some years where I thought some certain player maybe got screwed out of the Heisman or whatever the case may be, but they were still really good players. Gino Toretta was not that. Gino Toretta was just not only not a very good player, he just also had no business winning the Heisman Trophy in a year where Marshall Faulk was doing what he was doing and Garrison Hurst was doing what he was doing. And it was Marvin Jones had a brilliant year at linebacker for Florida State, finished 4th in Heisman Trophy voting. Reggie Brooks had a great year for a really good Notre Dame team. So he was really Everyone, I am terribly sorry. We have had a power outage in our neighborhood, and I am currently on my hotspot on my phone, which has very bad service and is not going to really be good enough for me to do the show. So I apologize for this. I don't. I was right in the middle of having a great conversation about the Heisman Trophy, and our power just went out. It looks like it's in our entire neighborhood, and it does. I don't know when it's going to be back. So I'm really sorry about this, but looks like I'm going to have to cancel the show today. I'll tell you what, if you're a board member, go into the boards right now and leave all your questions, and I will go in there and answer questions all day. So, and we're not getting storms. There's some really bad wind, so maybe a power line got knocked out, but it looks like it's through the whole neighborhood. So I'm gonna have to go try to figure this all out. So I apologize to y'all. I'm going to be tomorrow 1 o'clock. I'm going to go live at 1. I'm going to kind of finish up the defensive talk from yesterday. So I'll get an extra show in this week. But sorry about this, y'all. This one is one that I honestly can say is not my fault because I can't control the power around here. But go on the message board and I'll try to get on the hot spot and answer as many questions as I can. But today's show is going to have to be canceled. I hope that I could get it turned back on. I went to the breaker room. I was just hoping we blew a fuse and I could get it all turned back, but that wasn't the case. And it's through the whole neighborhood. So again, I really, really apologize, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks for listening, guys, on the Irish Breakdown podcast. I'll talk to you all again here very soon. Again, sorry about this.